Hi, and welcome back to the HE Enabled podcast. This is the show all about sharing our experiences of disability, neurodivergence, and long-term health conditions in the UK higher education system. I'm Cath, and this week I am joined by Emma. Emma is a PhD researcher at Queen Mary University of London, specialising in mental health disparities, specifically barriers to mental health diagnoses in people from global majority backgrounds. Their story spans across 5 degrees from 5 different universities, which I haven't had on the show in a very long time, and I'm very excited. So I think it is time to get started. Hi, Emma. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Cath. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Absolutely my pleasure. Please, could you just introduce yourself and share a little bit about your background in higher education?
Yeah, of course. So, my name is Emma, and as you mentioned, I have a bit of a complicated journey in higher education. I guess I can start off by listing what I've done to set the scene, and I can go into more detail into each university and degree throughout the podcast. But yeah, I'll just focus on the university degrees at the moment. So, I started off in my academic journey in BEng, so it's an undergrad in biomedical engineering at University of Strathclyde. Then I went on to do a master's at UCL, so that was when I moved to London for the first time to do a master's in physics and engineering in medicine. And then I went back home to Glasgow to do a master's in psychological science, which was a conversion degree. And then I got the studentship, 1+3 studentship, which essentially just means a PhD studentship, but the first year is a funded master's as well, which quite often informs the first stage of your PhD. So the master's was in developmental psychology and psychopathology at King's College London. And yeah, I'm currently doing a PhD at Queen Mary University of London. I think I was really lucky that university in Scotland is free for us, and I had a lot of support towards my tuition in London as well from the Scottish government. So yeah, shout out to Scotland, really.
Yeah, I've always been bottomlessly jealous of Scotland's fee structure, I will say. I spent a lot of time doing university advisory stuff when I was entering university myself, and it was like, if you do nursing, even if you're British, you can get free tuition in Scotland. It's like, I'm not anywhere near nursing, but like, God, that is tempting.
100% feel that.
But I didn't know they subsidised in the UK as well, the Scottish government. And what I also didn't know is that you're doing the 1+3, so you're doing your PhD at Queen Mary. One thing I was looking through your profile, and they actually let you do the masters at a different institution. So that was at King's.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm funded by ListDTP, which is essentially a funding body, I guess, that funds King's College, Queen Mary, and Imperial. So as long as it's within those institutions, yeah, you can do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Yeah.
And well, we'll cover what you do later because I think it's incredible. I'm looking at mental health disparities and like people from global majority backgrounds and the intersections of that. We have questions about that. We will come to it later. I'm very excited. In the meantime, if you're comfortable saying, how did your disabilities impact your experience of higher education?
Yeah, so I am a classic late diagnosed neurodivergent person. So I think I had a mixed experience, I guess, across the different institutions, also across the different disciplines, I guess, as well. So I was undiagnosed until early to mid 20s. So I didn't get support throughout my undergrad, throughout UCL for my first master's, and then Glasgow Uni for the second master's. But I did get support at King's and currently at Queen Mary. For just a bit of context, I did have adjustments at school due to English being my second language. So I moved from Japan to Scotland when I was age 10. So yeah, learning English was quite a chaotic journey, but yeah, I guess it helped that I had those adjustments in place. So I had, extra time for exams and was put in a separate room and so on. But my school grades were not very good, I guess, because it was all based on exams, at least at the time, and memorizing is something I really struggle with. And I think even though I had the adjustments, I was put in a separate room, which wasn't moderated as seriously as maybe the main room. So I really struggled with sensory difficulties at the time. Of course, now I know why that was the case. But yeah, I had the adjustments, but they weren't really helpful at the time, if that makes sense. So I think that really affected my self-confidence in general. But in terms of, I guess, to higher education, that was the first time I didn't have any adjustments, because I guess it didn't really matter that English was my second language at that point, because I was fluent by that point. But I think I was really lucky to get into the degree that I got into in the first place, because I didn't actually get the grades, but I think it was because it was the first time they were running that course. So I think they were a bit more lenient with letting people in. So I did do the engineering degree, and I think in hindsight, I chose that because I think when it comes to more of a mathsy degree, it requires less memorizing. And I think that because that is something I really struggled with, I think that's partially a reason why I chose that. And it was a good mix, I found, in terms of my undergrad, a good mix of exams and coursework, which I think for me worked really well. It was mostly exams, but I think compared to school, I performed a lot better because I think it was focused on something that I knew I was quite good at, and the way it was assessed was different. And I think I know a lot of neurodivergent people struggle with that transition from school to university, but I think I had more control over my environment and my life when I went to university compared to school. So I think for me, it was more of a positive transition. And yeah.
And you got to make like a lot of adjustments for yourself. I really like that. Would you say that now that you've had your diagnosis for a little while and you now work in neurodivergence and you use your research for that kind of activism, which again, we'll touch on later, do you feel like the way that you've kind of treated yourself has changed a lot, especially now that you get adjustments that you didn't have before?
Oh, definitely. And this is something I really want to emphasize throughout this episode, especially because I know I'd mentioned, my undergrad was relatively positive experience, but then my experience after that at UCL was an absolutely terrible time. And I can go through that into more detail in a bit. But definitely, I think I look back and I just think, oh, if I had those adjustments back then, it would have made so much difference to me in terms of, self-esteem, I think, the most important one, I think.
I get that, because it's always a lot of looking back like, oh, I did okay and I did all right, but could I have done more? And I think if you're late diagnosed or you struggled with support, just like you in like a general term, it can lead to a lot of regret and what ifs, and it takes a lot of effort to get through the other side of that rumination. And I don't feel like that's uncommon, nor like it's very natural.
For sure. And I guess no one's to blame because I didn't even know myself. So how could I have got that support, if that makes sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So you have been to 5 universities. Feel free to answer this question for any university which you please. What was your experience accessing higher education from a disability standpoint?
So as I previously mentioned, I think this wasn't applicable to most of my degrees, unfortunately, because I didn't have that diagnosis or even that awareness myself. But I think when I first experienced this was King's for my master's. And from the get-go, it was very much, these are the documents we need. And it was quite life-changing. It was really nice to see that someone was taking this seriously. I think the whole process can be quite exhausting, but I do think it is worth it to have that support in place.
Was that for disabled students allowance or was that for general support?
It was for both, yeah. Yeah. So I got a lot of the equipment and things like that as well, and I had the support plan in place.
Did you get mentoring as well?
I did get mentoring, yeah, and study skills and things like that. I think for me, the most helpful, though, was the extensions and the extra time in exams. And I think, especially when I was at UCL, the biggest thing that I struggled with was the exam conditions. So we had exams in the Excel Center. I don't know if you know how horrific.
I had a guest on a while ago. I believe it was Toby, who's also now a PhD at Queen Mary, who did his undergrad at UCL and didn't have to run around, essentially, because he has a limb difference. And he was very much like, yeah, I missed that whole thing. I'm so glad I missed that whole thing. So you were not my first guest, but you're the first one who did have to do their exams at the Excel.
Oh, If anyone from higher education who works there is listening to this, please change the venue, because I think it was already a really difficult time for me. I had a wild number of exams in a short space of time, and I was already experiencing a lot of difficulties, keeping up with what was going on in terms of studying. And I was staying overnight at the library and so on. And then the public transport to Excel itself is really distressing for neurodivergent people. But then you get there and it's so daunting. It's, hundreds of seats in this big hall. It's quite echoey, and it's situated pretty much next to an airport. So you hear the planes going over your head mid-exam. There was a Comic-Con happening at the same time as one of my exams. So Comic-Con people were trying to get into the exam hall, and I just completely blanked. And as I said before, I'm already really not great at exams. And it was just horrific. And I ended up failing actually quite a lot of my exams. For the first time in my life, I just did not do well at all. And it was just so stressful. And it just sent me to this, on this spiral. I think because I was already burnt out at this point, no information was going in, but coupled with that, environment was just an absolute nightmare. And I had to take some time out, and I was sent back to Scotland to recover from this mental breakdown that I ended up having. And so I completed a master's over 2 years in the end, which was really good, actually. To take that time out was really valuable. But I guess, sorry, I've gone on a bit of a tangent, but what I'm trying to say is I think the way we're assessed is so important, and in terms of environment and everything, it was horrific. I don't really know how to verbalize how stressful that experience was.
First of all, no need to apologize for tangents. I think this is such a rich experience, even if it kind of sucked. I am just trying to conceptualize. I'm a bit of a nerd. I know I've been to MCM Comic Con at the EXL, which I'm assuming this was May, if that's the case.
Yeah.
That is the biggest convention in the country. What on earth were they thinking?
I know, it really could have been avoided, they could have checked the calendar or the schedule or whatever. I just don't get how anyone, first of all, didn't check, or secondly, thought that was okay. It was just awful.
MCM is loud, first of all. And second of all is it's a very expensive place to be. So you'd assume, at the very least, that the local uni isn't doing their exams. Even from a student perspective, that sucks. Even from an attendee's perspective, it's also bad. This is just a universally bad situation.
For sure. It makes absolutely no sense. But yeah, it's quite a funny not funny, but it makes a good story now. There was a Comic-Con happening at the same time as my exams, and I could hear the Comic-Con vibes, kicking off. But yeah, it was quite an experience.
I once did that exact Comic-Con. It was the day before my GCSE maths exam. I cannot imagine being at that Comic-Con knowing people might be doing their uni exams in the next room. I cannot even consider the fact that was happening.
Right.
And it still is. Oh my God.
I know.
No.
So hopefully that's changed. But I guess, going back to your question about, King's was the first time I had that support in place. And King's also had their exams at Excel, actually. And I was like, oh my goodness, not again. I was dreading it. But because I was put in a separate room and I had that extra time, and it was considerably more positive experience for me in terms of, I just felt a lot more calm. I could actually focus, and it was quite life-changing. That
was it an extra time room, or was it a small room requirement as well?
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Nice.
So that, I guess, going back to the kind of late diagnosis and the mourning what could have been, I think that whole UCL experience, even though my mental health was bad anyway, I think it really could have been prevented if I had the right support, or even if I had the diagnosis or the awareness.
In a way, I don't even think it's a right support thing. Just don't schedule exams during one of the biggest Comic Cons in the country. I feel like there's an extra beat UCL might be missing here.
That's true.
Which, to be fair, this, even though it's a very unfortunate experience that I'm glad you made it to the other side of, it does lead quite nicely into the next question, so I'm going to ask it. Did you encounter any obstacles during your experience of higher education? Did you overcome them? And if so, how?
I think other than exams, I find lectures really intimidating and really stressful. I think especially when you're ADHD and you are very restless as a person, there's that pressure to, of course, sit still and listen. And I do have fidget toys and things like that, but I also think that draws more attention to myself. So I get a bit self-conscious using them when I know I shouldn't. So obviously I have, pens and things like that that I tend to play with, or my water bottle and things. So the more quote unquote socially acceptable stimming or fidgeting I tend to do. But I think when it comes to, I get this urge to, I really need to get up mid-lecture. Like I can't sit still. But then again, you get a bit self-conscious. Even though in my support plan at King's, it did say, allow Emma to get up whenever they want and stuff like that. I couldn't really bring myself to do that. And one other thing that would happen was they would often stream online lectures on the screen, but in person, if that makes sense. So we're watching, this big projector of this online lecture, which in theory, great. We get to see lectures from, across the world, people who can't attend in person. But for me, the audio was a nightmare. It was so painful, it was too much. And I would say to my course mates at the time, like, are you also struggling with the audio? And they were like, no, I think it's fine. It doesn't really bother me. And I was like, oh my gosh. So I felt like I couldn't really justify saying anything about it, if that makes sense. If it was a me problem, that's kind of, how I felt in my head. It's just me who's struggling with it. And the lights as well, in lectures, I just can't focus on anything that is being said if the lights aren't right, I guess. So I find, lectures in general, I find really daunting. And I think that's the good thing about doing a PhD is that we don't actually have to go to lectures. So I guess that's one good thing. But also I used to fall asleep in every single lecture during my undergrad and my first master's as well. During undergrad, I would just fall asleep, but I really wanted to focus, but I just would cut out and I'd always get into trouble, because it does look rude. But in my master's, I decided, okay, if I draw all over my notes, I can stay awake. So that's what I would do to compensate. But then I would also get into trouble for that. So doctors think I have narcolepsy as well. But I think the ADHD medication now really helps with that because I think they prescribe stimulants for narcolepsy anyway. So I think that's another reason why the ADHD diagnosis in particular was life-changing because now I don't fall asleep during lectures. But I think that was quite a big obstacle because I wasn't listening to lectures, but not because I didn't want to, just because my brain would shut down.
I get what you mean. So I did some film modules as part of my undergrad and they do these big screenings and it's always very much I have to brace myself to see if this audio is too much. If it is, I either put in headphones and listen to it through the headphones. I just have the headphones on mute. Or you just kind of wait to get used to it. And that can take a lot, but it sounds like having your stimulants are probably quite transformative for you in ways that I guess medically haven't necessarily been confirmed, but you can have a hunch and have a guess. But it sounds like you've still managed to get the support that you need for that, which is really, really positive.
For sure, for sure. Yeah, I think from that perspective, definitely it's been helpful. I think with the lights in the lecture hall and things, I was told by the course module people that, you should speak to every lecturer that comes in to switch the lights off and things like that. But I think because clearly, again, it was only me who was really that bothered by it. I felt a bit, I don't know what the word is. It didn't feel right for me to do that every single lecture, if that makes sense. It felt a bit, one, selfish, but two, like a burden. So I think even though that support plan was in place, I quite often wouldn't really follow it, if that makes sense, because quite a lot of it was up to me to execute that.
I mean, I don't think it was selfish at all because I know what it's like to need those kinds of adjustments. Did you adjust for it in other ways? Like, was it a lot of like wearing sunglasses and stuff like that just to try and keep the lights down a bit?
Yeah, yeah. So I did think about sunglasses because I was like, okay, maybe that is a solution. But again, I think I'm a very anxious person. I really worry about what other people think of me. So ultimately, I didn't end up doing that. And I was like, okay, I just need to push through. I just need to get through. So that's what I ended up doing.
Sometimes it's tricky, right? Because it's probably the healthiest option for you in the moment because you know that you don't want to go through the embarrassment potentially of being like, hey, I need this.
Hmm.
But then that can have such like consequences down the line. And at what point do you kind of reach that self-preservation? It's something that everyone balances with. I feel like if they're neurodivergent, I feel like it's definitely an example of it and where we find those boundaries, I guess.
Definitely. But yeah, earplugs are really helpful because I guess they're
Loops are
more
great.
subtle. Loops, exactly. They're more subtle. People don't really notice that you're wearing them. So they definitely got me through a lot of my, yeah, masters.
I got some loops recently and I very much do recommend them. They are wonderful.
They are so good.
Absolutely. So this next question, we're going to pull a little bit away from academics now. And again, I know we have a lot of ground to cover in terms of degrees to answer however you please or for whatever degrees you choose. But were there any clubs, societies, or initiatives that made a significant positive difference to your experience of higher education?
Yeah, so I actually did rowing during my undergrad, which is really funny thinking back because I don't really know why I did that. It wasn't like I had an interest in rowing. It wasn't like I did rowing before, but my flatmate at the time wanted to do it. So we just decided to do it. And I ended up taking it quite seriously. I ended up becoming novice women's captain and then senior women's captain. So it was something I really went for. But I don't know if it had an entirely positive difference purely because I think from a positive perspective, I think it did have a sense of community. I think I made a lot of really good friends there. And I think in terms of routine, it really helped me. I think I'm someone that really needs a routine, but really struggles to have a routine. So it's that classic ADHD.
You had
But
that accountability from elsewhere, and I'm guessing that helped a lot.
exactly, exactly. There were set, times for training, and I think that was really good for me. But at the same time, that also led to a lot of pressure because you have to attend. I think especially with rowing, if you don't go, then they can't row. Like your crew can't row, so you have to go. Once you commit. So I think it was kind of, yeah, good and bad from that perspective. And I guess physical activity is just good for you, isn't it? I think it really helped me, especially with my ADHD. So yeah, I think that's the club that I would give a shout out to.
As someone who also rode briefly, I do have to know. So you would have done this at Strathclyde?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So were you also like just traveling for meets as well and doing all of the logistics essentially on the weekends? That must have been a lot.
Yeah, so I didn't have any weekends throughout my undergrad because we were always on the water. And of course, because I was captain as well, I would be teaching the novice women at the time. So I would have my own training, then I would be teaching the novice women. It was really tough. And thinking back, I don't know how I did it. I couldn't do that now. But I think it is that routine thing. Like once you're in it and you just do it sort of thing. But I think it did lead to, I remember feeling really burnt out at points because you're actually not resting. If you're rowing all weekend, when do you actually rest?
Especially because rowing training can be quite intensive. I had one of my friends during my masters was one of the second boat rowers for Oxford Blues.
Wow.
And it was like, hey, how are you doing? She's like, I am exhausted. And this is my one evening off, like a week. I'm like, you need a nap, my love. Rowers can train incredibly hard, and I have nothing but respect for them. I will say that one big perk of rowing at Oxford is you don't have to travel. I can't imagine having to pack up my boat every weekend and like lugging it across Scotland. I do not envy you.
Especially, I think the Scottish weather, you're rowing in the pouring rain and then the rain gets all, your boat is full of rainwater and you lift it up over heads and you're just absolutely drenched. And
God.
honestly, I don't know why I thought that was fun, thinking back. But I guess, yeah, there was something about it that made me stay for 4 years. So, yeah.
Probably just the people, the charm of being on the water is quite fun, to be fair.
You're right. Mm-hmm.
Being on the water is pretty fun. But were you like, I get the impression you were doing everything. So you were like bank riding, you were in an 8. I'm guessing you were probably coxing as well.
Yeah, I was coxing as well. Yeah.
Oh my God. You didn't sleep for 4 years.
That's how it feels. Yeah. I think it really took away from my education, if anything. I think it was like rowing first, education second in a way. It was a really wild time. I don't know why we took it so seriously, but yeah.
Rowing, I feel like, as someone who has rowed, is just higher education's cult.
Yeah.
It's definitely like, I mean, go try rowing. It's great fun. Like, there's a reason we do it, but like, beware.
That's it.
Right. This next question is one that I ask all of my guests, and feel free to answer again however you please. I say that for the questions, I mean it for this one especially. Have you experienced any instances of your disabilities, neurodivergence, proving helpful in a higher education setting? No is a valid answer for this one.
I think this is a really interesting question. I think particularly in my PhD, I do think it has been helpful. I think especially because of the topic that my PhD is on. My passion for neurodivergence and mental health advocacy, I think, is what led to me pursuing this PhD in the first place. So I think, you get to deep dive into that one topic that you're super passionate about, relating to your focused interests. And my brain loves to hyper focus. So I guess once you're in it, you're really in it, sort of thing. I also have bipolar as well. So when I'm hypomanic, it can be helpful. I don't want to romanticize bipolar either, because I know hypomania isn't all, amazing, but sometimes it can be helpful for work. So yeah, that's one other good thing, I guess. I think particularly in my field, as I say, because I have that lived experience of being a multiply neurodivergent person, experience of mental health and so on, I think it does help to inform my research, as well as helping to connect with neurodivergent people that I speak to in my research. And I've had neurodivergent people say, oh, I find it easy to open up to you. I find it easy to talk to you. And I do think it is partially maybe because I'm a neurodivergent person who's disclosed my neurodivergence to them as well.
Do you think that inherently makes it easier for you because you've unmasked to yourself in a way, and they can read that energy immediately and just go, oh, this is like a safe person to be around? Do you think it's that as well?
I think so. Yeah. That's an interesting point. I think, in a super academic environment, I mask like so much. I don't know. I'm a very chaotic person, very all over the place person, but I try and be this person that's super organized, really on it. Whereas when I speak to neurodivergent people in my research, I do feel like I can be myself. Obviously, I still need to remain somewhat professional, but I think I do try and be as authentic as I can be. Yeah.
And I can imagine that if you have a neurodivergent person who will pick up on those kind of vibes immediately, it's not only going to help you get more authentic results out of your research, which from that perspective is helpful, it can also just help a lot with them trusting you and just having a nice, genuine human connection with someone.
Yeah, definitely. It's really nice, actually. That's my favorite thing about doing a PhD is, the fact that I get to meet all these amazing people that I wouldn't get to meet in day-to-day life. Yeah.
It's the same reason I do the show.
Amazing.
I meet those kind of people as well. Mm-hmm. And even if we're similar, I wouldn't have done all of the networking and had the opportunities that I had if it wasn't for it. So I feel like it's kind of similar.
For sure. Yeah.
It's nice. I'm going to ask you about your research now, which I've been very excited for. So I saw your talk at the Queen Mary event, which Daniel so lovingly advertised when he was on the show. It went really well. We both got to speak. It was lovely. Lots of food.
Yeah.
It was very good. I got so many cakes and biscuits out of that. But the more important thing I learned was about your work. And I think it's incredible. So your research is about how depression may present differently for neurodivergent people, especially at the intersection of ethnicity. And I'll let you obviously talk about your own research as well, but what I get from that is like understanding the labels of a GAD-7, GAD-9, and it's your standard depression questionnaire. I think that people have probably seen. It's like, do you feel this? Sometimes, often. It's very vague labels, and some of the categories you're like, I don't know if I feel this all the time, or I don't know whether I experience this feeling intensely enough. And you're looking at how we can make that kind of questionnaire more accessible, not just for neurodivergent folk, but for those from global majority backgrounds as well.
Yes.
I'm going to let you talk about this now, but I wanted to ask, like, what was one of the key things you've uncovered from working with groups with two very distinct yet intersecting identities? If you want to provide an overview of your research first, absolutely go ahead.
Yeah, I think you've covered what my research is about. As you said, I'm looking at mental health disparities in neurodivergent young adults from marginalized, minoritized backgrounds, and looking at why is it that neurodivergent people, although we know experience or are more likely to experience mental health difficulties, there's a big diagnostic gap when it comes to mental health diagnosis. Why are they not getting as diagnosed as we would expect, essentially? So that's what I'm broadly looking at, and I'm specifically focusing on depression and how, depression could be experienced or presents differently. And maybe that's why there is that diagnostic gap. Maybe that's one of the reasons why they're not getting diagnosed, because the current tools that we're using, the existing tools that we're using, aren't capturing these presentations, perhaps, or maybe the tools that we're using aren't accessible, or maybe they're not asking questions in ways we would expect people to interpret them, if that makes sense. So that's broadly what I'm looking at. But I think, to answer your question, it's so difficult to try and pinpoint one thing. There's so many things I'd love to talk about. But I guess, if I had to pick one key thing that's come up in my research so far is the role of masking and how it's happening at multiple levels. So in my work, I talk to neurodivergent people about, of course, the experience of depression, and we go through the commonly used screening tool called the PHQ-9, the Patient Health Questionnaire. And what...
Not the GAD-9, I got it wrong.
No, you're fine. PHQ-9. And what has become really clear is that many people are not just masking their neurodivergent traits, but are also masking their emotional distress. And for some people, particularly those from global majority backgrounds, there are, of course, strong cultural narratives around, needing to be resilient, needing to be strong, not showing weakness, not being a burden to others, or even in, some East Asian cultures, which I'm a bit more familiar with on a personal level. I think there's a lot of emphasis on maintaining harmony, which can make it, again, harder to openly express distress or that you're going through something difficult mentally. And of course, at the same time, certain behaviors are, of course, interpreted differently depending on someone's race, for example, because of stereotypes. But what this means, I guess, for my research is that then quite often people are then underreporting symptoms when they're filling out these screening tools, not because they're not struggling, but because, these tools don't account for potential extra masking that is happening because of your cultural background or because of your neurodivergence. So I guess this is really important to consider, because this is an additional barrier. If your distress isn't recognized, then you're not going to receive a diagnosis, you're not going to get access to support. So we're currently trying to work out how to consider this idea of multiple levels of masking, from a cultural level, neurodivergence perspective as well, so that we can best tailor this assessment tool.
That is incredible. Do you ever find that, just kind of on the back of that, you have people who have neurodivergent or like depressive characteristics, but they don't know that's what it is, because either it's so like internalized or normalized within their family, but also from their culture, that they don't actually realize that's what's going on either?
For sure. I've had a lot of people say to me, I didn't know until I spoke to my girlfriend who's a bit more aware or has has an interest in, I guess, in neurodivergent mental health. And that's when I realized, oh, I'm actually depressed, or I'm autistic, or, things like that. But then I guess it gets even more complicated, because how do you untangle that mental health and neurodivergence as well? So that's another topic I'm exploring, is that some people view it as, oh, it's all me and it's all a part of me. I don't feel the need to separate them. Other people view it as, oh, my depression is so separate to me being autistic, for example. So yeah, I think then it gets a bit more confusing. Or if you're multiply neurodivergent, if you're ADHD, that adds another layer of, well, what's what, because they're all so similar. Or is there a need to even know what's what? It's a whole thing.
I'm going to be asking for active updates on your research, and I cannot wait to see where it goes. So we're going to just have a quick change of tack. So in the run up to this episode, I asked my guests to send me a bit of information about themselves. And the one thing that really stuck out to me is how you mentioned using your research as a form of advocacy. And I was wondering I can kind of guess what you mean by that, but also, what is the most effective way you've used research as a form of advocacy so far?
Yeah, so I think with this, I think I have more plans for the future rather than things I've done. But I think in terms of things I've done, I think it's important to remember that, traditional psychology research has caused a lot of harm, especially to the autistic community, if we're thinking autism research. And there's a lot of distrust from the autistic community to researchers, and completely understandably. So I'm very passionate about ensuring that research is meaningful, impactful, or relevant, or that it aligns with the needs of the neurodivergent community, particularly those who are often underrepresented in research. So I do speak to a lot of neurodivergent people in my research, and I try to involve them in the research process. So that's what we call participatory research, is when, people who your research directly impacts is directly involved in the research process. So for example, coming up with the research questions, coming up with the interview schedule, the focus group schedule, and so on. So that's something that I'm very passionate about, and I really try to do in my research so that it's more of a bottom up rather than a top down. And I think I can say, I'm a neurodivergent person. It wouldn't necessarily be top down, but I still think I'm one neurodivergent person, and I want to ensure that I'm listening to diverse voices. And so because I guess with the participatory approaches, it's something I am passionate about, but it is really difficult to embed at a PhD level. I think there's so many constraints with funding, time, and you can end up comparing yourself to these big projects that have a lot of funding, doing participatory approaches in the perfect way where they're involving people in every stage of the research process. And it's just not possible in a PhD quite often, it's really difficult. So I recently started a network called the PhD Participatory Research Network, to explore how we can embed these approaches meaningfully at a PhD level, basically. So it's a network that is PhD researcher led. Anyone can come. It's across mainly London universities. But yeah, I think that in itself hopefully will encourage more people to do these participatory approaches, because I do think it really adds meaning to your research and can make it more impactful. So yeah, I think that would be the most effective thing I've done in terms of advocacy, but yeah, hopefully more to come.
You do, it's incredible. I'd say if you are a PhD student or a researcher who looks at participatory approaches and you happen to be around King's College London once a month, go check it out. I'll try and pop a link in the description. And I'm glad that you got to plug that, because otherwise I would have asked you to anyway. I think it's a wonderful initiative.
Thank you.
We're going to change tact again. We're kind of at the bottom of the questions, and I just want to cover everything I want to cover now. We've lost a little bit of continuity, but also I don't care, because I feel like we're asking good questions. So you've done 5 degrees, and that's a lot. And especially because it's been a lot of masters. So it was 1 bachelor's, 3 masters, and a PhD. Very impressive, absolutely incredible. I think you get along very well with Martin, who was on the show a while ago, has 5 master's degrees.
Oh, great.
I think you two would have a lot to talk about. But I was just wondering, obviously you've kind of had a lot of time to learn what works for you in an educational environment, even if it's not perfect. Do you have any tips and tricks that have made completing your degrees easier for you?
Yeah, I think it definitely varied from degree to degree. So, for example, with my medical physics degree, I was just trying to get through it, like just trying to survive, whereas other degrees, maybe I was really enjoying the process and really into it. I think the biggest thing for me was being open about what I was going through mentally with course mates that I trusted. And this being the key word, trusted. I think this really helped because when you're doing a university degree, you only really know what each other are going through, as in your course mates really know what you're going through. And I think, your close friends can also kind of empathize. But I do think in terms of what you really know is the course mates that you do your university degree with. So I think this really helped because we'd really look out for each other. And I think another piece of advice would be not listening to other people's advice of ways of working. And I don't know, this, for example, people say take lots of breaks and things like that. And I really tried to do that. But I think if you're a neurodivergent person, that's not always going to be effective. For example, for me, if I take a break, I just can't get back to the task, or I'll try and go back to the task, but I don't know where I was before I took the break. And also this sort of more strict way of working, I think doesn't really work for me. Some days I will not be able to do any work, not any work, but more or less any work. And then the next day I'll be able to bash out, a week's worth of work in 3 hours. So really listening to your own way of working and going with that rather than listening to kind of the traditional advice of how to study. And yeah, I think hyperfocus, there's a lot of power in hyperfocus. And yeah, I think accepting that your productivity is not going to always be predictable and not beating yourself up about it and not comparing yourself in terms of your work patterns. But this is something, I say this, but this is something I'm still working on. I think I still really struggle with this. But I think what matters is the end result. And yeah, trying to remember that.
And also, just to add on, if you're going to leverage hyperfocus, which, we're not against, but I think also acknowledging the time that you need for rest, because hyperfocus is very resource intensive.
Yes.
And knowing your working methods enough, not just to know how you're going to focus, but how you're going to rest as well. So, so important.
Oh, so important. So important. And I do think one thing I'll mention is that I think PhD has been not easiest, sorry, it's not been the easiest by any means. But I think for me, in the way I work, has been the degree that works most with how I work. So in a way, I think my master's, the first master's in particular, was really, really challenging. But then finding that I think my brain works with psychology as well. So it was a bit easier for me to get through psychology degrees as opposed to maybe the physics degree. So yeah, finding your thing. And also, because in a PhD, you have the one-to-one supervision with your supervisor, that's really helpful because you have that consistency. And also, yeah, having a mentor is quite life-changing as well. Like I see the same person every week, and yeah, it's been really good. So try and get someone you see consistently, I think is really important.
Mentors are incredible. We are nearly at time and we've got one question left, so we're going to crack this out. So we've covered a lot of ground today and it's been a really interesting, insightful discussion. I've deeply enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it too.
Yes, thank you.
I wanted to ask, if we were to take everything that we've spoken about today, if we were going to condense it down, what is the one key takeaway you would like listeners to remember from your story?
I think it's that being a neurodivergent person is hard and higher education is hard. And being a neurodivergent person in higher education, it is hard, but higher education can really be detrimental to neurodivergent people. And I see this through my research as well. When I speak to parents and carers, they say, my child is so smart, but the system is designed against them essentially, and they're failing their exams when I know they can do it. And I think that's really frustrating. So I think for me, getting my diagnosis was life-changing and it allowed me to thrive. I don't want to say thrive, but allowed me to be in higher education. And I think all the kind of negative impact, detrimental impact can be prevented with the right support, the diagnosis. And I do think asking for support, I know is daunting, but I think it's important for higher education institutions to create a space where we don't feel judged when we do ask for support. We want to just feel listened to. We might feel a bit distrustful towards the people because we've maybe been let down so many times. But I think what we want is just to feel listened to. And yeah, also, I think there's more of a need to change how everything is assessed in higher education, moving away from traditional exam approaches, but thinking more about other ways that maybe work better for us as well.
And having the capacity to look at alternative assessments as well. And
definitely.
Yeah, it always gets tricky with like accredited courses, but for the most part, yeah, like go look at that. I think it's incredibly important.
For sure.
But we've made it to the end of our questions, Emma.
Thank you. Oh my goodness.
So I am just gonna close and then we'll wrap, and I don't know, we might just continue chatting. This is quite nice.
Yeah.
So HE Enabled is the show dedicated to sharing our experiences of disability, neurodivergence, and long-term health conditions in the UK higher education system. I am always looking for guests. If you are interested in coming on, please get in touch at henenabled@gmail.com. I do not care if you are students, staff, academics, support staff, professional services, whether you graduated 5 or 50 years ago, or whether you're still there. I will interview anyone. If you want to come and share your story, please do get in touch. The link is in the show description. And I also have a Patreon that is also in the link tree. Please consider checking it out if you want to support the show. Cool. Emma, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. That was really fun.
Thank you so much for coming.